Ancient Greece's stone theaters, marble sculptures, and legendary tales have long been loved by tourists and academics. However, there is a far deeper tale hidden beneath these well-known sites. Greece did not suddenly become a realm of city-states and thinkers. It developed throughout millennia, influenced by foreign influences, changing trade routes, and the emergence and decline of many powers. Greek cultures first emerged on islands and coastal plains where they thrived because to marine trade and expert craftsmanship. This expertise was then passed down to mainland civilizations, which constructed fortified palaces, forged alliances, and fought conflicts that became epic stories. Following a period of collapse, communities bounced back and invented new forms of self-government, leading to the creation of the police, a paradigm that would revolutionize the ancient world. Significant advancements in literature, art, and architecture accompanied political shifts. This is the tale of how the Greeks established many of the intellectual and cultural pillars that we still rely upon today, from the smoke of battle to the foundations of democracy, from the enigmatic labyrinths of Crete to the epic songs honoring valiant acts. Let's start by discussing the Minoan civilization in Crete, which is among the oldest and most fascinating chapters. One of Europe's first highly developed civilizations, the Minoans lived on the island of Crete, which is situated at the intersection of the eastern Mediterranean. They flourished between 2000 and 1400 BCE, leaving behind impressive palaces, vibrant artwork, and the remnants of an intricate maritime culture. The excavations at Knossos, conducted by Sir Arthur Evans in the early 20th century, provided us with a great deal of information concerning them. He found a huge building beneath the Earth's strata that had administrative offices, great halls, vast storerooms, and ceremonial areas, all connected by labyrinthine passages. Evans gave this culture its name in honor of the Greek mythological character King Minos. However, there is still a paucity of conclusive evidence on the leadership structure of Minoan society. Important Minoan sites with palaces at their centers include Knossos Phaistos, Malia, and Zakros. These palaces probably performed a variety of roles, including housing kings or other elites acting as hubs for economic administration and hosting religious ceremonies. Grain oil and wine were stored in enormous clay pithoi jars in storerooms. Carefully stocked surplus supplies suggested a concentrated administration. Direct information on social hierarchy is still concealed in Minoan linear, but a script remains unintelligible. Archaeological evidence points to a well-structured civilization that encouraged large-scale construction projects, long-distance trade, and artisan specialization. Minoan Crete benefited from a prime location for trade by sea. Ships could sail across the Aegean to Egypt and to the Levant, thanks to the island's ports. Pottery, wood, textiles, and maybe metals that the Minoans obtained from other areas might all be considered trade items. The Minoan civilization was enhanced by these foreign contacts. Evidence of Egyptian Near Eastern and Cycladic styles may be seen in artifacts discovered on Crete. Meanwhile, Minoan goods, especially ceramics, made their way to far-off places. New concepts, artistic themes, and maybe even religious rituals were dispersed throughout the eastern Mediterranean as a result of this dynamic trade. The Minoans were among the most skilled fresco painters of all the ancient cultures. Images of lean people doing ceremonial or athletic tasks adorn the walls of their palace. The well-known bull leaping scenes show adolescent acrobats jumping over charging bulls, which might be interpreted as a religious ceremony or as a courage demonstration. Another recurring theme was marine life. This era's ceramic containers are embellished with fish shells and octopuses. These vibrant patterns honor the island's natural surroundings while also expressing a close connection to the water. Although Minoan religious beliefs are still somewhat unknown, women frequently occupy positions of power or have spiritual importance, often referred to as snake goddesses. Sculptures of women in robes clutching snakes and donning ornate headdresses imply a religious activity associated with the underworld or fertility. Sites of collective devotion involving animal sacrifices or offerings of clay figures can be found in open-air peak sanctuaries atop the mountains of Crete. The bull's significance as a ceremonial object is further shown by its prominent position in Minoan imagery. Although we are unable to verify the details of their myths, it is likely that fertility, natural cycles, and maybe the idea of a mother deity were central to Minoan religion. Archaeologists have found several clay tablets or seals with these signs, which frequently document commercial transactions. The Minoans created their own scripts, initially using Cretan hieroglyphic and then Linear A. Regretfully, the script is difficult to fully translate, although we are aware that it was utilized for administrative tasks such as recording tributes, naming employees, or counting products. The precise language underlying linear algebra is still unknown. This language barrier prevents a more thorough comprehension of Minoan law and politics. However, a high level of social complexity is indicated by the existence of a writing system. From within the palaces, administrators oversaw distribution, storage, and maybe trading. Thera, a volcanic island in modern-day Santorini, erupted catastrophically in 1628 BCE, sending ash and probably tsunamis toward Crete. There is disagreement on the precise effect on Minoan infrastructure. According to others, the eruption caused social unrest and economic weakness for the Minoans. Others point out that Minoan palaces were operational for a minimum of one generation after then. The damage may have been exacerbated by earthquakes, necessitating many attempts at reconstruction. The majority of Minoan palaces were destroyed by a string of calamitous incidents, fires, invasions, or internal strife between 1550 and 1450 BCE. The only one to survive was Knossos, which included Mycenaean influences. The Mycenaean writing system known as Linear B was first used on clay tablets at Knossos. The Minoan aristocracy seems to have been assimilated or replaced throughout time by mainland Greeks, who have incorporated elements of Cretan culture into their own. On Crete, Mycenaean domination had essentially replaced Minoan culture by the year 1400 BCE. Notwithstanding their demise, Minoan accomplishments left an enduring impression. Their magnificent buildings served as a template for Mycenaean establishments. Their established maritime commerce networks, which connected the Near East and the Aegean, continued to operate. Similar to vivid oceanic patterns, Minoan motifs impacted ceramic styles throughout the Greek mainland. In the later Greek myth of the Minotaur, which was preserved in epic storytelling, there were also references to the mythical labyrinth and the bull-centered ceremonies. Archaeological research has changed our understanding of the origins of the European Bronze Age. The Minoans are a highly developed civilization with sophisticated art, huge trading networks, and perhaps a complex social organization. They are by no means a footnote to the Mycenaeans. Their palaces, which have been partially restored at Knossos, continue to captivate the audience by combining myth and history in an environment where maze-like passageways were once teeming with activity. Future findings might provide more insight on Minoan writing or religious rituals, according to archaeologists. Up to that point, the Minoans serve as an essential link in the chain of early Mediterranean civilizations, connecting the developing societies of mainland Greece with the more ancient Near Eastern nations. Examining the Minoan era reveals the beginnings of a seafaring tradition and artistic creativity that would influence the Mycenaean era on the mainland, the next significant period in Greek history. On the Greek mainland, a parallel development took place to the Minoan flourishing on Crete. The Mycenaeans were influential palace builders in areas like the Peloponnese and Boeotia by the year 1600. These people built fortified citadels on top of rocky hills and left behind fabled items that dazzled both their contemporaries and subsequent historians. They are named for their most famous location, Mycenae. Mycenae, Tiryns, Pylos, and Thebes were important palace centers. The layout of Mycenaean palaces was more confined and fortified than that of the maze-like Minoan buildings. A megaron, a rectangular hall with a central fireplace and 2 or 4 pillars supporting the ceiling, was a common element of Mycenaean palaces. The Wanax, a local monarch mentioned in Linear B tablets, used this hall as their principal audience room. The megaron was surrounded by administrative offices, workshops, and storage facilities. Everything was surrounded by high walls made of large stones, which is how the word Cyclopean masonry came to be, since later Greeks thought that only giant cyclopes could have lifted such massive blocks. Palace scribes used clay tablets to record inventory, just like they did on Crete. They did, however, employ a new alphabet known as Linear B, which was modified for the Greek language and developed from Minoan writing. These inscriptions, which were deciphered in the middle of the 20th century, include listings of chariots' raw commodities like wool or metal and rations for soldiers. We can learn more about the management of local resources, taxes, and potentially commerce from this administrative data, insinuating recurrent conflict or the possibility of attacks. Many Pylos tablets describe the mobilization of men and supplies. As evidenced by their grave goods, Mycenaean society was more focused on battle than Minoan culture. At Mycenae, gold masks, jewelry, and swords inlaid with hunting or conflict themes were discovered in shaft tombs. The richness astounded excavators like Heinrich Schliemann, who is renowned for having claimed to have found Agamemnon's mask. The beauty and luxury of these tombs demonstrate that Mycenaean monarchs held significant authority, even though contemporary researchers alter the dates and wonder if they belong to the Homeric figure. The Aegean was not the only region with trade relations. Mycenaean pottery made their way to Egypt, the Levant, and Cyprus. The mainlanders received exotic commodities, ivory, and valuable gold in exchange. They modified several Minoan motifs to suit their own aesthetic preferences. A noble class that valued combat skill was reflected in the frequent depictions of hunts or processions of soldiers in frescoes. Both art and tablets depicted elaborate chariots as a sign of high rank. The Mycenaeans preferred heroic images and weapons, whereas the Minoans glorified bull jumping. Many later Greek myths, particularly the Trojan War legends, were set against the backdrop of the Mycenaeans. Tradition has it that Troy, a city on Asia Minor's northwestern coast, was besieged by a coalition of monarchs from the Mycenaean period. According to Homer's Iliad, the fight revolves around heavenly interventions and personal dignity. Layers of devastation found during archaeological digs in Hizarlik, Turkey, actually correspond to some characteristics of the Trojan War period. Whether a true battle broke out over trade routes controlling the Dardanelles around December is up for dispute among academics. It is conceivable that Mycenaean troops engaged in conflict with local rulers in that area, even if there is no concrete evidence to support this. Whatever the historical veracity of Homer's epics, the Mycenaean palaces possessed the means and military prowess to undertake maritime voyages. Large fleets, tens of thousands of rowers, or whole armies raised by royal commands are all mentioned in modern writings. Even if these figures are inflated, they demonstrate that the idea of extensive campaigns was not unattainable. Civilizations around the eastern Mediterranean were in turmoil about 1200. The Hittites were gone. Raids by sea peoples are mentioned in Egyptian records, and the palaces of Mycenae were repeatedly destroyed. This turmoil is often referred to by historians as the fall of the Bronze Age. It resulted in massive social unrest, the demise of royal economy, and the extinction of linear architecture in Mycenaean Greece. A few palaces were destroyed by fire. Others were left behind over time. The intricate governmental structures disappeared and people retreated to more defendable areas. What caused this collapse? Theories differ. Some contend that entire districts were destabilized by domestic uprisings against the palace aristocracy. Others point the finger at foreign invasions by Dorian sea peoples or tribes traveling via the Balkans. Economic crises may have been exacerbated by earthquakes or changes in the climate. The grand Mycenaean centers were either completely destroyed or significantly diminished by 1 through 100. Cultural fragmentation resulted from the slowing or cessation of the once thriving trade routes in luxury goods and metals. Oral tradition preserved the Mycenaean legacy despite the fall of the palaces. The epic cycles that bards would later recite throughout the Greek Dark Ages were influenced by tales of mighty heroes, fortified citadels, and golden masks. These stories eventually served as the inspiration for Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, maintaining a recollection of a period of heroism when strong monarchs raised armies and fought the gods. Greeks, living in less developed societies in later ages, were unable to readily imitate Mycenaean literacy or building, but they nevertheless valued the myths of their forebears' might. Archaeological relics, like the Cyclopean walls of Tiryns and the Lion Gate, were obvious representations of a bygone era of grandeur. Classical scholars occasionally visited these locations and conjectured about their provenance, adding to the idea of a heroic past that influenced Greek identity. The Mycenaean world exhibits a highly developed Bronze Age society to the present eye. Strong military traditions, palace-based governance, and sophisticated artisan manufacturing, especially goldsmithing. The Mycenaeans dominated the mainland with their colossal walls and heroic ethos, while the Minoans were masters of intricate paintings and marine activities. Collectively, they built the foundational elements of early Greek society, laying the groundwork for subsequent changes. Changes that would come after the Greek Dark Ages, a time of obscurity. Greece had a period of decreased complexity, sometimes referred to as the Greek Dark Ages, following the abandonment or destruction of the Mycenaean sites in November. Even if this word might be deceptive, there were still some obvious areas of continuity. There has been a decrease in construction activity, international trade, and population size, according to archaeological findings. More regional, smaller-scale communities took the place of the highly structured royal economy. The bureaucratic structure, utilizing linear B tablets, likewise disappeared with the fall of the palaces. Writing essentially stopped in the absence of organized authority to promote literacy. The majority of commodities were made and traded at the family or village level, compared to the elaborately decorated vessels of Mycenaean or Minoan eras pottery types from this era, which are sometimes referred to as proto-geometric. Or geometric have simpler artistic themes. Burial artifacts are frequently simple, representing a culture that imports less costly items. Local chiefs may have arisen in certain places, but their influence was not as great as that of the former royal rulers. We do not see big architectural undertakings or the construction of massive fortresses. Partially mythological are historical allusions to Dorian invasions. It's uncertain if immigration from the north occurred after the collapse, or if they played a major role. In any case, the Greek world was transformed into isolated agricultural settlements that barely had shards of Bronze period recollections. Oral tradition was crucial to the preservation of knowledge throughout these more subdued eras. Ioidoi, or bards, wrote and performed epic stories about historical heroes. Though undocumented, these tales preserved memories of Mycenaean soldiers, sieges, and the magnificence of palaces. These stories will eventually come together to form the Homer-attributed Iliad and Odyssey. The notion of a heroic period persisted even though specifics may have altered in the retelling. Kinship groupings were probably the foundation of social institutions throughout the Dark Ages. Families eventually came together to form little towns that started drawing borders. It's possible that hero worship or ancestral cults developed with people worshiping mythical ancestors in modest shrines, as ironworking skills proliferated. Stronger and more widely available tools and weapons than bronze were made possible. This made it easier for communities to adjust to the difficulties of farming and the sporadic disputes with neighbors. There were indications of a renaissance by the late 9th and early 8th century BCE, with geometric designs of meanders, circles, and zigzags. Pottery styles grew increasingly complex. Archaeologists find that grave items have somewhat increased in certain burial sites, suggesting a return to modest wealth. On a lower scale than during the Mycenaean period, agricultural surpluses could have facilitated the re-establishment of trade networks and denser communities. The adoption of the Phoenician script, which was significantly altered to suit the Greek language, was one of the most important developments. Compared to the previous syllabic scripts, this allowed for more flexible writing, which revolutionized communication. The impending comeback of reading and record-keeping was signaled by the Greeks' employment of alphabetic writing for small inscriptions on pottery or stone about 800 BCE. Local leadership systems became increasingly sophisticated as settlements developed. Communities might increase their power by occupying strategically located harbors or defendable hilltops. As time went on, the polis, a city-state with self-government public discourse and organized legal systems, began to take shape. These so-called dark centuries sowed the seeds for significant cultural changes, such as the Greek Renaissance in the 7th century BCE. This era, though occasionally disregarded, contributed to the creation of a new Greek world, Smaller villages were able to try out other forms of government as a result of the departure from palace-centered administration. A heroic past that would bind future generations together under common legendary narratives was preserved in oral epics. When the Archaic period arrived, the gradual spread of iron and the return of writing would be essential. Therefore, the Dark Ages served as an essential link between the active city-states that would soon change the course of Mediterranean history and the palaces of the Bronze Age. Around August BCE, Greek civilization began to expand steadily after years of diminished complexity during the Dark Ages. The Archaic Age, which lasted from around 800 to 500 BCE, began as a result of this revival. The foundations of ancient Greece were established over these years. Colonization dispersed Greek culture far beyond the Aegean. New political structures emerged, independent city-states, or polias, became more distinct, and literature and the arts saw unparalleled growth. The rise of the polis, an independent society focused on the city. The surrounding countryside and an urban core was a significant development. A strong feeling of local identity was fostered by the fact that each polis had its own army laws, religious festivals, and governmental authorities. An acropolis, a fortified hill with temples or shrines to regional deities, and an agora, a public space used for marketplaces and gatherings, were frequently found in the center of the city. In the Archaic era, there were more formal municipal structures, whereas in the Dark Ages, there were chiefs or small-scale governing organizations. At first, an aristocracy was formed by wealthy families or clans. These elites divided authority among themselves in several polis switching positions and allowing only individuals with noble ancestry to enter. When non-aristocratic individuals, like as merchants or landowners, wanted a bigger say, tensions increased. Gradually, the governance changed as a result of these confrontations. Economic life was likewise varied. The proliferation of iron implements may have contributed to the growth in agricultural output. Mediterranean trade relations were restored. Greek ceramics gained popularity as exports because of its geometric or soon-to-be black figure motifs. Greeks, in turn, imported raw resources from places like Egypt, Phoenicia, and the Black Sea coasts, such as metals, lumber, or valuable commodities. A wave of colonization was sparked by population pressures and the allure of international markets. Greek city-states sent parties of settlers to establish new polis overseas during the 7th and 6th century BCE. Famous colonies developed in the region known as Magna Graecia, which includes Sicily and southern Italy, as well as along the Thrace coast, the Black Sea, the Bosporus, and farther west, close to present-day Marseille. Usually, settlers were led by a prominent figure known as an oikist, who took sacred fire from the home city's hearth to light a new civic hearth in the colony. These new cities retained cultural links to their metropolis despite being autonomous. Greek mythology, language, and customs were widely disseminated during this extensive expansion, which also exposed the newcomers to local cultures. Power disputes intensified as city-states expanded. Aristocrats controlled positions of authority and obtained benefits through customary familial relationships. This aristocratic monopoly was challenged, however, by wealthy merchants or upwardly mobile families. Tyrants rose to power as a result in numerous polis. Those who came to power by popular support or coercion. Nowadays, the word tyrant connotes a brutal autocrat. However, a lot of dictators in ancient Greece enjoyed the support of common people who were keen to overthrow the aristocracy. To boost municipal pride, they can support construction projects, religious rituals, or open-air celebrations. A good example is Corinth under Capselos, who increased commerce, built new public works, and improved harbor facilities in the middle of the 7th century BCE. Athens makes a more thorough argument. Archons magistrates chosen from aristocratic families were in charge of it by the late 7th century BCE. Social turmoil resulted from disputes between affluent clans, and some smaller farmers became enslaved to debt. Draco established Athens's first written system of rules in the 600s BCE, and it is renowned for its harshness. 594 BCE Solon, a generation later, instituted extensive changes. In addition to restructuring political authority according to property classes and allowing more people to join the assembly, he also canceled debts that oppressed Athenians. Solon's method led a wider range of free male citizens to participate in governance, even if it was not yet democratic. In order to avoid an instant descent into despotism, his reforms also sought to strike a balance between the interests of the expanding merchant class and the aristocracy. A dictator called Pisistratus eventually came to power in Athens. But throughout his reign, temples were constructed and celebrations like the Panathenea were promoted, fostering a sense of community and overcoming social barriers. The southern Peloponnese city of Sparta followed a different route. Helots, a kind of state-owned serfs, were created when the Spartans first overran the nearby territory of Messina. Sparta created a militaristic system to hold this sizable subject population under control. The semi-legendary lawgiver Lycurgus is credited for reorganizing Spartan society around equality and discipline for the city's top male residents. Boys started attending a state school known as the Agoge, where they received intense instruction in loyalty fighting and group living. Sparta had a council of elders, 2 hereditary monarchs, and ephors, who served as a check on authority. The communal approach to male citizen life was distinctive, prioritizing military cooperation above individual freedom, even though it was not a democracy. Sparta had a feared land army because of this method, but less centered on colonization or trade. Intense cultural inventiveness was also encouraged throughout the Archaic Age. In the 8th or early 7th century BCE, the Iliad and Odyssey, 2 Homeric epics, were probably written down, transforming centuries of oral tradition into a recognized literary form. Another poet, Hesiod, wrote Theogony and Works and Days, which described the gods' ancestries and offered moral and useful advice. In different parts of Greece, lyrical poetry with musical accompaniment flourished. Personal sentiments of love and desire were examined in Sappho on Lesbos. Poetry by Alcaeus Tertius and others addressed politics, conflict, and civic pride. As a result, poetry evolved into a platform for both private and public thought. Potters shifted from geometric themes to more figurative designs in the visual arts. Black figure vase art, which portrayed everyday life athletic competitions and legendary subjects, first appeared in Corinth and then extended to Athens. The red figure method developed in the 6th century BCE, enabling more intricate depictions of the human body. In the meanwhile, life-size sculptures known as core, or clothed female youth, and kouros, or naked male youth, were created by sculptors. By the late Archaic era, sculptors were starting to depict realistic posture and anatomy. But the first specimens are rigid and symmetrical. Religion served as a unifying factor among many city-states. Greek athletes, ambassadors, and pilgrims traveled from all over the country to attend games and festivals held in pan-Hellenic sanctuaries such as Olympia, which was dedicated to Zeus, and Delphi, which was revered to Apollo. Olympian champions returned to their home palace with a tremendous deal of prestige. Even in the midst of disputes, the idea of a common Greek identity was strengthened at Delphi when individuals and city delegations sought advice from the oracle on matters of politics or personal choice. Military tactics also changed during the Archaic era. The primary configuration was the hoplite phalanx. Infantry with heavy weapons stood shoulder to shoulder, their shields overlaying one another. Usually each hoplite was a citizen soldier in charge of his own gear. A big circular shield, the hoplon a spear, greaves breastplate, and a helmet. Only those who could afford armor, typically those from the middle and higher classes, were able to participate due to this criterion. The success of the phalanx depended on collaboration. The line may fall apart if one soldier broke formation. Citizens' feeling of political empowerment and shared duty were cultivated by this companionship. Seafaring governments also started to develop their naval capabilities. Due to its two harbors, Corinth was able to dominate commerce routes across the narrow isthmus and became an early naval power. Later, in reaction to outside threats, Athens would increase its fleet. However, the resurgent trade networks of the Archaic era sowed the seeds for marine power. Many polis had changed by 500 BCE, and these changes would shape Greek culture for years to come. While some towns remained under aristocratic councils or were controlled by dictators, others saw stability under mild changes. A whole region's culture was centered on military duty, according to Sparta's distinctive constitution. After enduring the dictatorship of Pisistratus and the reforms of Solon, Athens was poised for even more profound political changes that would ultimately result in democracy. Greek art was developing culturally in the direction of what would be referred to as classical style. Potters were experimenting with new methods, and thematic depth lyric poets were expressing the intensity of personal feeling, and writers were honing epic narratives into coherent works. Colonies flourished throughout the Greek world, with some even outstripping their home cities in richness and stature. Meanwhile, in the East, the threat of nations like Lydia and Persia grew closer. In many respects, the Archaic Age was a prelude to the dramatic events of the 5th century BCE, as well as the climax of adaptation and survival from the Dark Ages. The Persian Wars, Athens' golden period, and the emergence of new political structures would define the following stage, which would draw attention from all around the world. However, without the political experimentation, artistic creation, and revitalized networks established during the Archaic era, none of it would have been feasible. The fundamental social structures of Greece developed here. Separate yet connected, they shared a pan-Hellenic ethos and flourished in poetry and art, laying the groundwork for future generations of great accomplishments. Many Greek police had developed during the Archaic era by the late 6th century BCE, creating well-organized governments, prosperous economies, and unique cultural customs. However, they continued to be politically divided, prone to rivalries and sporadic coalitions. In the meantime, the Persian Empire, a huge force, was expanding on the eastern horizon. Persia, which was established by Cyrus the Great and expanded by monarchs such as Cambyses and Darius III, ruled over territories ranging from Asia Minor to the Indus Valley. The Persian Wars, some of the most well-known battles in ancient history, were brought on by the collision of these two worlds. The autonomous Greek city-states and the imperial strength of Persia. The Lydian kingdom of Western Anatolia was overrun by Persia in May. As a result, Persians took control of Ionian Greek towns along the Asia Minor coast. Despite their affluence and rich cultural heritage, these seaside villages lacked cohesion. Some Ionian inhabitants were unhappy because local Greek dictators frequently oversaw daily operations under Persian satraps. These Ionian towns rebelled against Persian rule in April under the leadership of Miletus. They called for assistance from their relatives around the Aegean. Limited reinforcements from Athens and Eretria, a minor city, set fire to Sardis, the provincial headquarters of Persia. But the response from Persia was enormous. By April, Miletus had been fired, the Ionian uprising had been put down, and Asia Minor was once again under Persian domination. Athens and Eretria's intervention infuriated King Darius I. He made the decision to punish them and extend Persian rule over Greece's mainland. The first invasion of European Greece by Persia was made possible by this choice. In April, Darius I sent a navy across the Aegean. The Persians besieged Eretria, captured it, and destroyed it after defeating island outposts along the route. Then, some 40 kilometers northeast of Athens, they touched down on the plain of Marathon. On such broad ground, the far bigger Persian army faced up against Athenian warriors who were reinforced by a small detachment from Plataea. The hoplite phalanx worked well in spite of their numerical disadvantage. The Athenians, headed by the commander Miltiades, surrounded the Persians with a decisive attack. The Persians retreated to their ships as their ranks fell. The win attained by Athens was unexpected. Although there is disagreement over the exact magnitude of the Persian losses at Marathon, the psychological toll was evident. Disciplined Greek hoplites had halted a troop with only a few weapons. In Greek memory, the name Marathon became legendary. Athens, however, did not take this victory for granted. The Athenians started to fortify their defenses after realizing Persia was still a threat. In example, the Athens general Themistocles promoted strengthening the fleet in order to foresee potential maritime attacks. Darius passed away in April, leaving his son Xerxes I to carry on the Greek subjugation effort. In order to march his army into Europe in April, Xerxes spent years building a sizable land and naval force and constructing pontoon bridges to span the Hellespont, the modern-day Dardanelles. In order to overcome Greek opposition and completely take the peninsula, this massive invading army moved via Thrace and Macedonia. Several Greek polis made the decision to rebel, uniting under the leadership of Athens at sea and Sparta on land. At crucial choke points, a coalition comprising Sparta, Athens, Corinth, and other cities coalesced despite the fact that many smaller city-states either yielded or remained neutral. Thermopylae, a slender route between mountains and the sea, is where the first well-known stand took place. The Spartan king Leonidas commanded a small Greek force that repelled the Persian army there for several days. The Persians eventually discovered a mountain route that enabled them to outflank the defenders. After refusing to back down, Leonidas and his 300 Spartans, along with a few hundred allies, were overpowered. Even though they lost, the Thermopylae resistance gave the Greek allies time to be ready. In the meantime, the Persian naval force arrived in northern Euboea and engaged in combat with a Greek ally at Artemisium. The Greeks retreated to safer positions close to the Saronic Gulf, following a number of conflicts. Athens, which the populace had fled in accordance with Themistocles' plan, was overrun and destroyed by Xerxes as he moved south. This prepared the way for a pivotal naval battle at Salamis. A narrow strait close to Athens is called Salamis. The Greek triremes, which are more agile in tight spaces, had an edge when Themistocles used strategic ingenuity and shrewd diplomacy to entice the bigger Persian fleet into the restricted waterways. The Persians were crushed by the allied Greek ships in a bloody but crucial combat, which sank several ships and forced the survivors to flee. This triumph weakened Xerxes' naval capability while maintaining the Greek alliance's morale. Fearing about his supply lines in the absence of naval backup, Xerxes pulled a large portion of his army back to Asia. However, he left Mardonius, a general, to carry on with a large force. In an attempt to sever the alliance or entice allies away, Mardonius's surviving Persian army invaded portions of northern and central Greece in April. But in Boeotia, a sizable Greek coalition, under the leadership of the Spartan regent Pausanias, organized close to the town of Plataea. The Greeks drove the Persians into a decisive battle following weeks of strategy and skirmishing. Once more, it was the heavier hoplite infantry that won the battle. When Mardonius was slain, the Persian army fell apart in confusion. At Mycale, in Asia Minor, allied Greek ships engaged the Persian navy the same day, destroying or seizing several ships and inciting another uprising in the Ionian towns. The Greeks reclaimed the Aegean and drove Persia out of mainland Greece with these twin victories at Plataea and Mycale. Through cooperation, strategic topographical advantages, and the potency of Greek hoplite and naval tactics, the allied city-states defeated Xerxes' invasion despite its astounding scale. The threat posed by the Persians did not completely disappear. The Greeks feared another invasion, and many Ionian cities still need defense. Sparta was hesitant to spearhead any Aegean operations, as they were content to defend the Greek mainland. Seeing its chance, and having a powerful fleet, Athens took charge of a maritime coalition. This coalition, which was first centered on the holy island of Delos, was established in April, and was later dubbed the Delian League. As the leading naval force, Athens took charge once member nations donated ships or funds. The Delian League eventually took control of key areas and drove Persian garrisons out of the Aegean. A mutual defense agreement gradually evolved into a tool of Athens' power. Athens' grandiose construction projects were financed the League coffers, and the Athenian fleet frequently used force to thwart bids to quit the League. Athens gradually turned the Delian League into an empire of its own. Greek identity was profoundly impacted by the Persian Wars. Their triumph over a far more powerful empire encouraged pride and solidarity among the previously divided city-states. The victory at Salamis inspired the Athenians to expand their navy and validated the importance of maritime power. Since many rowers who were lower-class citizens had been instrumental in maritime conflicts, democratic institutions also earned reputation in Athens. These events were chronicled in detail by Greek historians such as Herodotus, who is sometimes referred to be the father of history. In addition to showcasing Persian might, Herodotus's histories examined the cultural differences between Greeks and barbarians, influencing Greek self-perception for years to come. Recounted in oratory, drama, and intellectual debates, the triumphs at Marathon, Thermopylae, Salamis, and Plataea became legendary events. However, conflicts that would shape the next chapter of Greek history were sparked by the aftermath of the battle. Two major powers with competing interests were Sparta and Athens. Sparta supported a conservative strategy centered on the Peloponnese, while Athens promoted more anti-Persian operations and established a maritime empire. These divergent ideologies would eventually splinter the Greek coalition, resulting in internal strife that eclipsed the Ionian Greeks' eventual freedom from Persian domination. As of the end of April, Greece had successfully defended her territory against a massive invasion, opening the door to a new period of Greek development and cultural success. The ground was prepared for what many refer to as Athens' Golden Age, which saw both a rise in animosity amongst the great city-states and remarkable advancements in politics, art, and philosophy. Athens was the center of Greek political, cultural, and military dominance by the middle of the 5th century BCE. The Aegean Sea was dominated by its powerful naval, which was supported by Dalian League allies, or subjects. Athens was flooded with tribute, which fueled enormous building projects and fostered a thriving intellectual community. Modern academics refer to this period as the Golden Age of Athens, or the Age of Pericles, because of the changes the city underwent under the direction of leaders like Pericles, which would have a lasting impact on Western history. Athens oversaw the Delian League's military operations to drive Persian garrisons out of coastal regions following the Persian Wars. Athens strengthened its hold on ally city-states, while Persia's might declined in the Aegean. Naxos and Thasos, two league members that attempted to break away, were forcibly subjugated. League dues were eventually transformed from ship donations into cash tribute, which was first placed on Delos and subsequently moved to Athens. This made it possible for the Athenians to maintain public works projects, fund a robust navy, and even compensate individuals for their civic responsibilities. Not every Greek was in favor of Athens' growth. As the head of the Peloponnesian League, Sparta saw Athens' growing might as a danger. Although there were occasional disputes over alliances and territory, outright warfare was avoided for many years. Athens experienced relative peace and prosperity throughout this time, allocating resources towards cultural developments. Politically, Athens had been changing since Solon's reforms in May. Following the Persian Wars, democratic institutions continued to grow. Legislation was ultimately decided by the People's Assembly, or ecclesia, which was made up of adult male citizens. To guarantee wider participation, a council of 500 people, Boule, drafted laws for discussion and filled several positions by a lottery. Influential people like Themistocles or Pericles were able to direct military and political policy because important posts requiring skill, like as generals and strategoi, were still chosen. One significant change was the implementation of compensation for public office, which Pericles promoted. Women slaves, foreign residents, and medical professionals were not granted full citizenship, but Athens allowed participation by paying citizens for serving on juries or in other civic capacities, even for individuals without independent money. Now, a previously unheard of percentage of free men participated in politics. This system, also referred to as radical democracy, depended on large-scale assemblies where people cast direct votes on proposed legislation treaties and military initiatives. In the April, Pericles became a powerful statesman and held the position of strategos on many occasions. He promoted the notion that Athens was destined to be the center of the Greek world. Under his direction, Athens started massive rebuilding on the Acropolis, which the Persians had demolished using league finances. The centerpiece of this reconstruction endeavor was the Parthenon, which was devoted to Athena. Parthenos, often known as Athena the Virgin. It was designed in the Doric style and had minor modifications that gave the appearance of perfect symmetry. Many of the creative creations, such as the imposing figure of Athena within the Parthenon, made of gold and ivory, were overseen by the famous sculptor Phidias. Other buildings quickly adorned the Erechtheion with its renowned caryatid porch, the Temple of Athena Nike, the Propylaea, a large entry gateway, and the Acropolis. In addition to paying homage to the city's patron goddess, these constructions gave the Greek world a glimpse of Athens' riches and workmanship. In order to ensure widespread support among laborers and craftsmen, the state compensated workers from a variety of vocations, including stonemasons, sculptors, and painters. Pericles backed cultural establishments as well. Athens provided a responsive audience for historians, philosophers, and dramatists. Large audiences attended yearly festivals like the Dionysia, which featured comedies, tragedies, and theatrical plays. Thinkers were able to discuss topics ranging from cosmology to ethics in intellectual meetings held in private houses or the agora. Pericles declared Athens to be a Greek center of education and publicly welcomed gifted people to come. The blossoming of literature, particularly play, was a defining feature of the Golden Period. The oldest Greek plays still in existence were written by Aeschylus and frequently dealt with mythological or ethical issues, examining the conflict between human justice and divine will. By creating complicated characters like Oedipus and Antigone, whose individual decisions conflict with fate, or the dictates of the state, Sophocles furthered the refinement of tragedy. By challenging conventional standards and portraying unfiltered emotions, Euripides added more psychological reality. Comedy flourished as well, particularly with Aristophanes, whose plays such as Lysistrata or The Clouds parodied Athens' social mores and well-known individuals. Through wit satire and slapstick comedy, the comedic theater offered a platform for incisive political and cultural critique. Although some of these dramatists encountered opposition from influential people, they all relied on the city's democratic freedom of expression. The visual arts developed quickly. As sculpture shifted toward naturalism, it captured emotions of serene ideal beauty, as well as bodily action. While some artists experimented with dynamic stances, others, like Polykleitos, built the canon of proportions. Vase painting also achieved new heights in the red figure method, showcasing ordinary situations or legendary stories with remarkable realism. Their roots were established in this vibrant atmosphere of discussion and free inquiry. Even though these sophists and Socrates are frequently linked to Athens in the latter half of the 5th century, sophists taught reasoning rhetoric and a critical attitude toward conventional wisdom as they journeyed from city to city. A move toward human-centered thinking was suggested by the famous declaration made by figures such as Protagoras that man is the measure of all things. In public discussions, Socrates, an Athens resident, challenged moral and epistemological presumptions. Even though he was not well known in official roles, his incessant probing helped Athens become known as a center of intellectual activity. Western philosophy would be founded on the concepts of Socrates as passed down from his subsequent disciples. However, he was one voice among many examining truth and ethics in a culture that was changing quickly in the middle of the 5th century. Herodotus's chronicles of the Persian Wars, which combined personal research and narrative, also gave rise to historians. He was dubbed the father of history because of his interest in other countries and peoples. However, because he included fantastic tales, some critics dubbed him the father of lying. Thucydides was a younger historian who would later document the Peloponnesian War. Using a more analytical style influenced by the logical atmosphere of Athens. Athens's artistic genius, notwithstanding tensions, grew both inside and beyond the city. The way that Athens treated members of the Delian League as subjects infuriated several Greek city-states. The city repressed uprisings, imposed conformity with its foreign policy, and demanded tributes. The morality of utilizing league funding for construction projects was questioned by some, even in Athens. As Athenian power expanded Sparta, the head of the Peloponnesian League observed with caution. Uncomfortable truces resulted from sporadic battles that occurred, such as the so-called First Peloponnesian War, which raged from 460 to 445 BCE. By April, everything was in place for a major conflict. The relationships and combat preparation of each bloc were put to the test when a disagreement between Athens and Corinth, a Spartan ally over Corcyra, or modern-day Corfu, turned into a bigger clash. While Sparta relied on its stronger ground troops, Pericles thought Athens could depend on its navy and fortifications. Furthermore, Athens had social differences between more extreme democrats and aristocracy. These divides, albeit obscured by the city's achievements, would sometimes show themselves as ostracisms or political trials. Notably, Pericles carefully weighed the opinions of the populace, yet he still encountered resistance in the assembly. Athens was a cultural powerhouse by the time the war broke out in April. Even outside of Greece, its literary masterpieces and marble monuments continued to inspire succeeding generations. Greek civilization was portrayed to the world through the Parthenon Sophocles dramas and Herodotus's historical narratives. Athens, where free citizens discussed, was once described by Pericles as the school of Hellas. The human intellect explored philosophy and science, and artists produced new forms. But its heyday also planted the seeds of strife. Athens' imperialist actions alienated other polis, making the Delian League a vulnerable organization. Once it started, the Peloponnesian War would put Athens' democratic system to the test and obscure many of its cultural accomplishments with the grim reality of protracted conflict. The achievements of the middle of the 5th century BCE left a tremendous legacy notwithstanding the final catastrophe that lay ahead. Periclean Athens, with its democratic principles, theatrical festivals, and sculpture masterpieces, continues to be seen as a pivotal period in Western political and cultural history. The arduous warfare between opposing coalitions known as the Peloponnesian War, which engulfed Greece, will be introduced in the next chapter. The Greek world was severely split between two major blocs by the end of the 5th century BCE. By accumulating tribute and displaying naval might, Athens and her allies controlled the waters. With the support of towns like Corinth and Thebes, Sparta, and the Peloponnesian League concentrated on ground combat. Despite the fact that both sides had fought together against Persia decades before, their cohesiveness had been undermined by mistrust and disagreements. There were periods of uneasy quiet until April, when open fighting broke out in what became known as the Peloponnesian War. War resulted from a number of disagreements, but the direct cause was Corinthian grievances at Athenian meddling in colonies such as Corcyra and Potidæa. Strong Spartan supporter Corinth persuaded Sparta that Athens had broken earlier truces. Fearing Athenian encroachment, the Spartan parliament ultimately declared war. Athens, under Pericles' leadership, thought that its lengthy walls, which connected the city to its harbor at Piraeus, and its powerful fleet, would shield it against Spartan assaults of Attica. The Archidamian War, which lasted from 431 to 421 BCE, the Peace of Nicaeus, which lasted from 421 to 413 BCE, and the Deucalion or Ionian War, which lasted from 413 to 404 BCE, are the three traditional stages of the conflict. Archidamus II, a Spartan monarch, frequently invaded Attica during the Archidamian War, destroying farms in an attempt to drive Athens into a land combat. With their navy to provide supplies through the port, Pericles told the Athenians to take refuge inside the city walls. Athens' fleet invaded coastal towns in the Peloponnese, while the Spartans destroyed fields. Both sides failed to deliver a decisive blow, and the stalemate persisted. Unfortunately, a terrible disease struck Athens in April as a result of overcrowding. According to contemporary researchers, it may have been typhus, the bubonic plague, or another illness. Pericles was among the many that perished. Critics blamed the tactic of avoiding open land warfare for the city's discontent and morale decline caused by the plague. Athens, however, persisted. An embarrassment to Sparta, which took pride in its unbeatable soldiers, the bold tactics of a charismatic captain named Cleon led to the capture of Spartan hoplites on the island of Sphacteria in April. The Peace of Nicaeus was reached in April when both sides became tired of the ceaseless attacks and impasse. This truce, which was named for an Athenian commander, put a temporary end to significant conflicts. But the tranquility turned out to be brittle. Localized conflicts resulted from the pursuit of individual agendas by allies on both sides, such as Argos and lesser city-states for Athens or Corinth, and Thebes for Sparta. There was internal pressure on Sparta to restore its lost renown. Athens had higher aspirations as well. In April, Athens made one of its most crucial choices. The assembly decided to deploy a sizable expedition to Sicily because of the attractive possibility of money and strategic benefit. The idea was to support Segesta in its fight against Syracuse, a strong Dorian colony that was aligned with Sparta. Prominent Athenian leaders like Alcibiades supported this initiative, while others like Nicias voiced concerns about the expense and danger. With thousands of hoplites and a wide variety of ships, the fleet set off in spite of the objections. Issues started to appear almost immediately. Alcibiades defected to Sparta after being sent back to stand trial for suspected religious sacrilege. The campaign faltered under the watchful Nicias and the flaming Lamachus. Syracuse pinned down the Athenians after fortifying themselves and obtaining Spartan assistance. Athens' attempts to bolster the mission failed miserably. All of the Athenian forces in Sicily were either annihilated or taken prisoner by April, and those who survived were reportedly forced to work in stone quarries. The blow was disastrous. In addition to losing ships and soldiers, Athens also lost the decades-long perception of maritime superiority. In Attica, around 20 kilometers from Athens, Sparta took advantage of the situation and fortified Decelea. Slaves from the silver mines at Lorient were compelled to desert during the occupation of Decelea, which also cut off a large portion of Athens's agricultural land. The area became the scene of frequent Spartan attacks. Concurrently, Lysander, a competent Spartan admiral, pursued partnerships with Persia, proposing the potential for regaining Ionian Greek towns in return for Persian financial support. Athens's main maritime edge was undermined when Sparta was able to grow its navy thanks to Persian wealth. The Athenians were very resilient. They even prevailed in a few naval engagements and restored some of their fleet. However, the strain was tremendous. Internal conflict increased, morale declined, and financial resources were depleted. In an attempt to negotiate with Sparta, aristocratic groups staged a revolution in April that temporarily formed an oligarchy, the government of the 400. Democracy was finally restored at home, however, since the major Athenian naval stationed at Samos refused to acknowledge the new government. Under Lysander's Spartan naval might increased following years of erratic fortunes. He captured or destroyed almost the whole Athenian fleet in his overwhelming victory at Aegospami on the Hellespont in April. The people of Athens risked hunger as the city was blockaded and there was no way to import grain. Athens gave up in April. The Athenian Empire was dissolved. The Great Walls were demolished, and the 30 tyrants, a puppet oligarchic regime, were put in place. The entire area was damaged by the conflict, but Sparta was now the leading Greek power. Resources had been used, trade networks were harmed, and many had perished. Persia continued to be a powerful presence in the Aegean, while factionalism among city-states continued. The Greeks' sense of communal victory in the Persian Wars gave way to fatigue and resentment. An important turning point in Greek history was the Peloponnesian War, which the Athenian historian Thucydides detailed in great detail. According to Thucydides, it was not just a matter of divine will, but also one motivated by fear, power battles, and errors of judgment. His writings, which examine issues of actual politics, democratic decision-making, and moral quandaries during times of conflict, continue to be a cornerstone of political philosophy. Despite losing, Athens maintained its cultural standing. Dramatists, like as Euripides and Aristophanes, continued to create significant works, even throughout the conflict. In the midst of the city's crises, philosophers like Socrates continued to be active and challenged Athenian values. However, running an empire presented its own set of challenges for Sparta's system. The Spartans were known for their discipline, but maintaining control over hesitant allies was more difficult than running a defensive league. Sparta would find it difficult to hold on to power in the near aftermath. Greece's power dynamics were drastically altered by the conflict, which made Thebes and ultimately Macedon the main actors. But the destruction of the Peloponnesian War persisted. It weakened economic growth, shattered long-standing alliances, and cast doubt on the notion that Greek city-states could withstand outside intervention if they banded together. In the 4th century, new alliances and rivalries would soon emerge, ushering in a period of conflicting hegemonies and fresh faces that would finally lead to Macedonia's ascent to power under Philip II. Sparta momentarily had unparalleled power in Greece after Athens was vanquished at the end of the Peloponnesian War. However, this dominance would not last long. As city-states struggled for independence and new leaders aspired to regional supremacy, the 4th century BCE saw the beginning of a complicated web of shifting alliances and uprisings. Spartan strength declined. Thebes rose without warning. Athens never reclaimed its previous empire, although it did recover somewhat. In the backdrop, Macedonia, a northern kingdom, started implementing reforms that would eventually change the Greek world as a whole. Following April Athens, where the repressive 30 tyrants reigned for a short time before being ousted by pro-democracy movements, was one of the places that Sparta imposed oligarchies on. Because Spartan governors' harmostes and garrisons were expensive and restricted local liberties, many Greeks were angry of Spartan meddling. Since Ionian cities had long been of Persian interest, Spartan attempts to increase their influence over them also brought them into war with Persia once more. Sparta found it difficult to run an empire because of its strict social system and limited population. As fewer Spartans had full rights class conflicts increased, resources were also depleted by the logistical requirements of policing distant allies. Even while the Spartans were still very good in land combat, their naval prowess was not up to par with the resources that Athens had previously controlled. Spartan control was undermined by uprisings and shifting loyalties. The start of the war against Persia in Asia Minor, which the Spartans were unable to carry out effectively without wider Greek assistance, marked a turning point. The establishment of Thebes in Boeotia was another unexpected occurrence. Thebes, historically eclipsed by Sparta, and Athens took advantage of the widespread dissatisfaction with Spartan governance. Pelopidas and Epaminondas were two Theban leaders who reformed their armies around the beginning of the 4th century BCE. Thebes achieved a historic triumph at the Battle of Leuctra in March. There, Epaminondas defeated Sparta's once invincible hoplite phalanx by using novel strategies, including a widened left wing and the elite holy band. The Greek world was startled by this loss, shattering the idea of Spartan invulnerability. The agricultural foundation of Sparta was severely undermined when Thebes organized a coalition to liberate Messina from Spartan rule. Thebes seized the lead for a short time, rebuilding the Boeotian League under its direction and forming new partnerships. Epaminondas was an exceptional statesman and military strategist who even threatened Sparta itself by repeatedly launching campaigns into the Peloponnese. Epaminondas lost his life in combat at Mantinea 362 BCE. Therefore, Theban dominance was similarly short-lived. Without his guidance, Thebes found it difficult to keep its allies together, and new forces began to appear. After being freed from the 30 tyrants, Athens progressively re-established democracy. In an effort to regain some Aegean allies, Athens established new maritime confederacies and kept a respectable navy despite losing the majority of her empire. However, internal factionalism hindered policy and money remained tight. In their speeches, Athenian orators like Demosthenes and Isocrates expressed these conflicts by bemoaning past splendors or suggesting fresh approaches. Athens maintained its artistic impact even if it lacked the great riches of the 5th century. Philosophical and rhetorical schools flourished, drawing pupils from all around Greece. Macedonia, a kingdom to the north, started to rise as the city-states in the south clashed. The Macedonians have always been viewed as peripheral or semi-Greek. Tribal areas were governed by their monarchy, which also occasionally collaborated with Greek city-states, such as when King Alexander formed the first alliance with Athens during the Persian Wars. However, Macedonia was sometimes written off as being backward since it lacked central Greece's sophisticated Polish organization. During the reign of King Philip II, this perception underwent a significant shift. March to March of 1959. Having been a captive at Thebes for a portion of his childhood, Philip had witnessed Epaminondas's military reforms. After ascending to the throne, Alexander restructured the Macedonian army, establishing a powerful phalanx and adopting a longer pike known as the sarissa. He formed an elite companion cavalry as well. Philip protected Macedonia's borders from Thracians and Illyrians through marriages, diplomacy, and battle before moving south and aiming for power in Thessaly. By promising allies or threatening intervention, he took advantage of the Greek polis' internal disputes. Until it was too late, Greek city-states failed to recognize his increasing influence. The social war and the religious war, which involved Delphi, were among the conflicts that Philip became embroiled in during his first significant actions. Macedonian engagement was made possible by the intrigue between many Greek powers, including Phocis, which had taken control of the Delphic treasury and Thebes. Philip gained moral validity by portraying himself as a protector of Apollo's hallowed shrine. He either allied with or subjugated important territories one by one. His army overran the Chalcidic city of Olynthus, eliminating a significant barrier to Macedonian growth. Demosthenes, an Athens orator, warned against Philip's intrusions in his stirring speeches, which became known as the Philippics. However, since other nations retained past grievances or sought Macedonian assistance for their own problems, Athens found it difficult to present a united front. Only in March, when Philip's forces posed a more direct danger to central Greece, did a wide Greek alliance come into being. Athens and Thebes made a last-minute alliance after realizing the Macedonian danger. In Boeotia, they encountered Philip's army close to Chaeronea. The conflict turned out to be decisive. The allied phalanxes were routed by Philip's armies, who included his adolescent son, Alexander, in a crucial cavalry role. The elite holy band of Thebes was destroyed. Athens lost a lot of people. Philip gained undeniable control over Greece after defeating these once dominant polis. Following this, Philip established the Corinthian League, a federation that purportedly brought Greek nations together, but in reality, placed them under Macedonian rule. Sparta declined to participate, but it was unable to stop it. Philip stated that the League's goal was to liberate Greek cities in Asia Minor and wage a united attack against the Persian Empire in retaliation for previous invasions. While some Greeks despised Macedon's domination, many regarded this as an opportunity for restored pride and an end to domestic strife. Philip was slain in March during a party in Age, before he could carry out his entire scheme. He was replaced by his third son, Alexander, who was just 20 years old at the time. It was unclear if Greek city-states could escape Macedonian control. However, Alexander quickly demonstrated his strength. He re-established authority over the Corinthian League, put an end to uprisings, and brutally warned by destroying Thebes in March. Alexander began the fabled conquests that would change the ancient world by marching into Asia Minor. As a result, the end of the 4th century BCE was markedly different from its beginning. Sparta was no longer in a position of authority. The ascendancy of Thebes was over. Additionally, under Macedonian influence, Athens was reduced to a second-tier power, despite maintaining its cultural influence. Only under a foreign monarchy that used its resources to establish an empire could Greece, which had before been fiercely autonomous, find unity. Under the leadership of Alexander the Great, the tale now expanded beyond the Aegean into Persia, Egypt, and beyond, replacing the ancient polis systems that had dominated the 5th century. Alexander, a 20-year-old prince, took the Macedonian throne in March. He would become known as the Great in less than 10 years, having taken over an empire that stretched from Greece to Egypt and all the way into Asia. The Hellenistic Age was a new period in the ancient world that was molded by the quick genius of his expeditions and the subsequent blending of cultures. However, Alexander's legacy also raised concerns about the precarious equilibrium between individual aspirations and the stability of enormous empires. Some Greek cities perceived a chance to reclaim their independence after the murder of King Philip II. In an attempt to overthrow Macedonian domination, Thebes organized an uprising. Alexander besieged Thebes by moving quickly and forcefully to the south. He destroyed nearly all of the city when it fell in March, leaving only homes connected to the poet Pindar intact. Other polis were startled into acquiescence by this harsh measure. In order to avoid suffering the same fate, Athens and other cities hurried to confirm their participation in the Corinthian League. Early consolidation by Alexander was similar to Philip's tactics. He employed sarissa-wielding, well-trained phalanxes backed by a superior companion cavalry. Parmenion and other trusted generals from his father's reign continued the Macedonian practice of orderly combat. Alexander, meanwhile, led from the front and liberally distributed the prizes to foster personal devotion among his soldiers. Alexander focused on the Persian Empire after securing mainland Greece. With an estimated 35,000 soldiers, he crossed the Hellespont in March, while positioned as the hegemon of the Corinthian League. In a symbolic act that connected his campaign with Greek epic history, he paid tribute to Homeric heroes by visiting the location typically associated with Troy. Local Persian satraps tried to stop his progress at the river Granicus, which was his first significant encounter. Despite nearly losing their lives in the battle, Alexander's army prevailed, creating a route into Western Asia Minor. Greek cities that had long been ruled by the Persians greeted him as a liberator as he marched down the Ionian coast. Although he established Macedonian garrisons in key sites, Alexander often overthrew local tyrannies and permitted towns to join his league. He advanced interior by the march seizing or arranging the capitulation of important satrapal strongholds. The rapidity of Alexander's campaign caught Persian king Darius III off surprise, and he started to raise a royal army to fight him. Alexander and Darius III met in the vicinity of Issos in southeastern Asia Minor in the latter part of 3033 BCE. The Persian numerical advantage was reduced by the rough terrain, and Alexander's cavalry attacked Darius's position, forcing him to retreat. When Persian morale collapsed, their camp was ransacked. Alexander became the legal guardian of Darius's mother, wife, and daughters. Alexander, however, crafted a story of generosity while treating them with dignity. Alexander decided to protect Persian naval facilities and stop a Persian force from endangering the Aegean by turning south toward the Levant and Egypt, instead of immediately pursuing Darius. An excellent illustration of his tenacity was the siege of Tyre in 332 BCE. For months, Tyre, an island city off the coast of Phoenicia, resisted. Under intense missile fire, Alexander constructed a causeway that propelled siege engines ahead. The barriers were eventually breached. Tyre was brutally captured. Although many were slaughtered or sold into slavery, it showed how determined Alexander was to eliminate any opposition. Alexander was greeted as a liberator from Persian domination when he arrived in Egypt without facing significant opposition. He was connected to divine ancestry by the Memphis priests, who acknowledged him as a genuine pharaoh. Alexander, seeking local legitimacy, offered sacrifices to the Egyptian gods, maybe even visiting the Sur oasis for an oracular visit, when the oracle allegedly addressed him as a son of Zeus Ammon. The specifics of that encounter are still unclear, but Alexander developed a sense of semi-divine status that elevated his stature in the eyes of both Macedonians and Egyptians. Then he established Alexandria, a new metropolis in the western Nile Delta. Long after Alexander's death, Alexandria, which was originally planned as a vital port and administrative hub, would develop into a significant Hellenistic city known for its library and blending of cultures. Because of its strategic location, Greece, Egypt, and the larger Mediterranean were all easily accessible. When Alexander returned to the battle in March, Darius had amassed a sizable army. The pivotal conflict took place at Gaugamela, which is close to present-day Erbil, Iraq. Darius's lines were once again broken by Alexander's well-organized phalanxes and prompt cavalry movements, even though the Persians had a numerical advantage and war chariots. Alexander took control of the Persian capitals of Babylon, Susa, and ultimately Persepolis, the symbolic center of the empire, while Darius fled east. Parts of Persepolis were famously burned, perhaps as a drunken whim, or as retaliation for the Persians' decades-old destruction of the Athenian Acropolis. For whatever cause, it signaled the demise of the political core of the Achaemenid Empire. Darius was pursued by Alexander farther into the Iranian plateau. Bessus Darius's own nobleman killed him in March when he attempted to carry on the resistance, declaring himself to be Darius's legitimate heir. Alexander denounced Bessus as a usurper. He launched persistent efforts to put down local uprisings by marching into the far eastern regions of Bactria and Sogdiana, which are now part of modern Afghanistan and Uzbekistan by March. Although resistance was delayed by the difficult terrain and guerrilla tactics, Alexander's men adjusted by establishing a number of garrisons and marrying local nobles to cultivate allegiance. Alexander attempted with a program of cultural synthesis in these eastern areas. By incorporating aspects of Persian attire and court customs such as proskynesis or bowing or prostration, he recruited Persians into his army. Many Macedonians were concerned about this because they saw Alexander's new fashion as a rejection of traditional Macedonian and Greek values. A few police officers objected. Philotas Parmenian's son was put to death for a supposed plot. Alexander later ordered the death of experienced commander Parmenian personally in order to avert reprisals. In March, hundreds of Macedonian warriors married Persian women in mass wedding ceremonies at Susa, marking the symbolic culmination of Alexander's endeavor to unite Greek, Macedonian, and Persian elites. By forming connections through familial ties, Alexander personally wed Roxana of Bactria and 2 Persian princesses. Nevertheless, distrust and animosity grew among Macedonians, leading to incidents like the Opus Feast, where Alexander almost faced rebellion due to his alleged partiality for Persian courtiers. In March, Alexander crossed the Hindu Kush into the northwestern Indian subcontinent, pressing further east out of restlessness. Local leaders fiercely opposed him, most notably King Porus, at the Battle of the Hydaspes River in 326 BCE. Despite winning, Alexander's army was worn down by constant fighting new terrain and monsoon rains. They declined to march any farther into the plain of the Ganges. Alexander, disappointed at last, consented to go back. Before returning to Persian territory, the army endured more difficulties in the Gedrosian Desert and Makran coast as it journeyed along the Indus River. Alexander set up administrative hubs throughout his realm by March. In addition to managing satrapies run by both Macedonians and local elites, he created towns like Alexandria and struck coinage. His plans for more expansions, possibly into Arabia, were unexpectedly shelved. Alexander passed away unexpectedly in Babylon in March at the age of 32, most likely from a fever or from wounds and tiredness. His latter days are the subject of several tales. Although there is no known cause, some people believe it may be poisoning typhoid or malaria. There was no adult successor left by Alexander. At the time of his death, his son by Roxana was still unborn. After decades of conflict that created new dynasties, his generals, later known as the Diadochi, divided the empire. The Antigonids in Macedonia, the Seleucids in Asia, and the Ptolemies in Egypt. The Hellenistic Age, a time of cultural mingling throughout the Eastern Mediterranean and Near East, began with this fragmentation. In towns like Alexandria, Antioch, and Pergamon, the Greek language and institutions blended with Egyptian Persian and other regional customs to create a cosmopolitan atmosphere. His endeavor introduced Greek-style art money and urban life to hitherto unexplored regions. Hellenistic kings supported intellectuals and fostered scientific research and philosophical schools. Greek culture, however, changed as a result of Eastern influences embracing new creative and religious cults. Greek and regional customs combined to create a dynamic blend that would influence Mediterranean and Middle Eastern history for centuries to come. Nevertheless, Alexander's military prowess and personal leadership served as the foundation for his empire. Unity fell apart fast without him. Whether he planned a true blending of peoples or just employed cultural gestures to consolidate conquests is up for discussion among contemporary historians. Whatever the motivations, the impact was significant. From Greece to the Indus Valley, fresh possibilities and conflicts led to advancements in language, art, and government that have shaped history for generations. Alexander remains a mythical figure, a young victor who never lost a significant conflict, a visionary who opened Greek eyes to the world beyond the Aegean. He was viewed as a role model for ambition and leadership by monarchs in later periods, from ancient Rome to medieval Europe and beyond. However, his unexpected passing highlights how flimsy personal empires may be. The Greek world would never be the same after a frenzied decade of conquests as it entered a Hellenistic phase that broke with the classical polis-centered period of the 5th century BCE. Alexander's generals, known as the Diadochi, started separating areas from the empire after his untimely death in March. Alexander's enormous conquests broke apart into several kingdoms since none could keep the whole thing together. Greek civilization spread over the eastern Mediterranean and beyond during this time, known as the Hellenistic era. March, blending with regional customs to produce new kinds of philosophy, art, and government. Alexander's senior generals began fighting for succession shortly after his death. Alexander's half-brother Philip Aridaeus, who had various disabilities, was another possible heir. But Alexander the Forfa, the son of Alexander's wife Roxana, was too young to hold the throne. Competing generals asserted kingship or regency. Different dynasties were established as a result of the Diadochi's multi-decade-long conflicts. Ptolemy, the first Soter, established the Ptolemaic kingdom in Egypt. The Ptolemies, who had their capital at Alexandria, maintained Greek administrative and cultural structures while posing as pharaohs. Seleucus I Nicator established the Seleucid Empire in Asia. It stretched from Asia Minor to Persia, but it lost parts like Bactria throughout time. Antigonus Gonatas founded the Antigonid Kingdom in Macedonia, which ruled over Macedon and a portion of northern Greece. Other kingdoms included lesser powers like the Greco-Bactrian Kingdom, which later spread into portions of India, and Pergamon, which was ruled by the Attalid dynasty in Asia Minor. Many Greek city-states first attempted to regain their independence, but these strong monarchies, each with sizable permanent armies, war elephants brought in from the east, and advanced siege technologies overshadowed them. City republics like Sparta and Athens occasionally revolted, but they were unable to pose a significant danger to the Hellenistic rulers because they were not united. Although the word Hellenistic comes from the Greek word for Greece, Hellas, it refers to a change from the traditional polis-centered culture to a more globalized one. Throughout these kingdoms, the Greek language became the norm for intellectual and administrative life. A mix of Greek and native customs resulted from local elites frequently adopting Greek practices in an attempt to win favor with the monarchy. The Diadochi established or grew cities with Greek-style agoras, theaters, and gymnasia. Most notably, Alexandria in Egypt and Antioch in Syria. However, these locations also included regional components. resulting in a lively blending of cultures. Greek settlers were affected by Egyptian, Babylonian, Persian, and other traditions, which led to the creation of new religious cults, hybrid deities like Serapis that combined Egyptian and Greek characteristics, and a variety of artistic forms. Science, mathematics, and philosophy all experienced tremendous advances during the Hellenistic era. The Minoans, a center for intellectuals who promoted knowledge in disciplines including astronomy, mathematics, geography, and medicine, and the Library of Alexandria, were both supported by the Ptolemies in Alexandria. One of the most important individuals was Euclid, who wrote Elements, a methodical work of geometry that had a lasting impact for centuries. Syracuse native Archimedes is well known for his contributions to mechanics, hydrostatics, and innovations like as the Archimedean screw. Eratosthenes, who created a map of the known globe and determined the circumference of the planet with remarkable precision. Hero of Alexandria, and others who built on Hellenistic engineering techniques later in the Roman era. The classical schools of philosophy gave way to other schools that addressed individual ethics in a society that was changing. Zeno of Citium established Stoicism, which emphasized emotional control and the pursuit of virtue in balance with the natural world. Under the leadership of Epicurus, Epicureanism promoted abstention from public conflict and asserted that pleasure, which is defined as the absence of anxiety, is the ultimate ideal. Cynicism and skepticism provided additional criticisms of societal norms and knowledge. Even while Athens still had educational institutions like Plato's Academy and Aristotle's Lyceum, important philosophical discussions were now dispersed across Hellenistic cities. The idealized forms of the ancient age were not as realistic, expressive, or energetic as the art of the Hellenistic period. Higher drama, elaborate draperies, and tragedy were displayed in sculptures such as the dying Gaul Lochkon and his sons, and the winged victory Nike of Samothrace. Instead of concentrating just on gods or valiant young people, artists portrayed common people, elderly men, children, and scenes from markets. The architecture became more colossal. The huge altar of Zeus, with its high-relief frieze of gods fighting giants, was built by the Attalids at Pergamon. Widely spaced Corinthian columns with elaborate caps made of acanthus leaves. Large-scale city planning emerged particularly in cities with expansive docks and boulevards like Alexandria. Patron monarchs competed with one another to create public structures, libraries, and temples that combined Eastern opulence with Greek ancestry. Seldom were the great Hellenistic kingdoms stable. The Ptolemies and Seleucids engaged in repeated wars over disputed areas such as Kular Syria, which depleted resources and weakened both forces. Hellenistic culture spread over Central Asia after the Seleucids lost control of Bactria and areas that broke away to create the Greco-Bactrian kingdom in the east. Local powers in Anatolia, like as Pontus and Pergamon, became stronger, in the meanwhile taking advantage of the bigger kingdom's attention being diverted elsewhere. The growing influence of Rome in the Western Mediterranean was one of the developing factors. Later, Rome looked to Greece and the Hellenistic East after first being preoccupied with Carthage and other neighboring powers. The Hellenistic dynasties made room for Roman involvement because they were undermined by internal strife and coalitions that looked to Rome for assistance against competing monarchs. Roman soldiers had overrun Macedonia, overthrown the Seleucids, and started to encroach on the eastern Mediterranean by the middle of the 2nd century BCE. The Hellenistic era established long-lasting foundations even in the face of ultimate Roman dominance. The New Testament and other early Christian texts were influenced by the Greek language, which was still used as a medium of governance and culture across the East. Scholarly traditions that would transmit Greek knowledge to subsequent civilizations were nurtured in centers such as Alexandria. Roman elites absorbed Hellenistic styles and incorporated them into their own, inspired by art, literature, and philosophical systems. The Hellenistic era, which combined Babylonian, Persian, Egyptian, and Greek religious, artistic, and political traditions, was in many ways a globalization of Greek civilization. Real authority moved to royal courts, which used bureaucracy and sizable standing armies even while the polis remained in place. The next significant change was made possible by this metamorphosis. The rise of Rome and the Greek world's eventual incorporation into the Roman Republic, and subsequently the Roman Empire. After conquering Carthage in the Punic Wars and gaining control over a large portion of the Western Mediterranean, Rome had become a powerful force by the 2nd century BCE. Rival city-states failed to put up a cohesive front when the Greek world broke apart into Hellenistic kingdoms. In order to exert influence over their neighbors, certain Greek kingdoms formed alliances with Rome, which unintentionally led to increased Roman intervention in Greek affairs. A new period of foreign domination was ushered in when Roman armies, over many decades, destroyed the main Hellenistic states and conquered mainland Greece. Early interactions between Rome and the Greek East were intermittent and frequently focused on diplomatic ties. However, agreements with several Greek states resulted from Rome's expanding area of influence. Between 214 to 205 BCE, Philip Theiss of Macedon, who had sided with Hannibal of Carthage, faced off against Rome in the First Macedonian War. This combat was indecisive, but it showed that Rome was prepared to fight outside of Italy. Rome defended itself as the rescuer of Greek kingdoms from Macedonian domination in later conflicts, such as the Second Macedonian War, which lasted from 296 to 197 BCE. Philip V was ultimately defeated at Cynoscephalae in 197 BCE. Greek cities were notably declared free by the Roman commander Flamininus, but Rome continued to have a supervisory role. With its decline in the 3rd century, Sparta was not a formidable foe. The Seleucids in Macedonia, or Asia Minor, posed more serious dangers as they attempted to regain control. The expansion of Roman-friendly kingdoms like Pergamon in Asia Minor was made possible by the fall of Antiochus III of the Seleucid Empire, who was beaten by Roman soldiers at Thermopylae in 119 BCE, and Magnesia in 119 BCE. Under King Perseus, tensions with Macedon erupted once more, resulting in the Third Macedonian War, which raged from 141 to 158 BCE. During the Battle of Pydna in 186 BCE, Rome soundly defeated Perseus. Macedonia's independence was essentially terminated by this triumph. Rome cut off communication between the 4 puppet states that made up Macedon. Macedon was ruled by Roman governors who meddled in local matters, although not being officially conquered at first. A cruel example resulted from Roman frustration with opposition in southern Greece. For generations, Corinth has been a center of both culture and commerce. Coincidentally, Lucius Mummius's Roman army stormed Corinth in January of the same year that Rome destroyed Carthage, murdering or enslaving a large portion of the populace. The city's valuables were taken to Rome when it was destroyed. With the creation of the Achaean province in January, this act marked the symbolic end of Greek political autonomy. With philosophers and rhetoricians drawing Roman elites, Athens was able to retain part of its reputation as a center of study. But it also submitted to Roman rule. Punishment came from sporadic uprisings or coalitions with anti-Roman armies. During the Mithridatic Wars in 86 BCE, Sulla took control of Athens and pillaged portions of the city. Roman rulers such as Hadrian, however, supported Athens throughout the next imperial era by funding new construction and promoting a Greek cultural renaissance. Rich Roman families gradually sent their sons to Athens to study oratory and philosophy, enhancing the city's standing as a center of ancient culture even after it lost its independence. The situation was scarcely better in other Hellenistic empires. In January, King Attalus III gave Pergamon to Rome, making it the Asian province. Rome and its allies gained land from the Seleucid Empire, which was devastated by internal conflict. Syria became a Roman province by the middle of the 1st century BCE as a result of the victories made in the eastern Mediterranean by Roman generals like Pompey the Great. Ptolemy-ruled Egypt persisted until the Battle of Actium in 321 BCE, when Octavian, the future Emperor Augustus, defeated Cleopatra VII. The Hellenistic era officially ended when Cleopatra committed suicide in 30 BCE, transforming Egypt into a Roman colony. In many respects, Greek culture triumphed against its conqueror, while Rome seized political and military dominance. Greek philosophy and art were revered by wealthy Romans. In affluent Roman homes, Greek grammarians and tutors were commonplace. Roman villas were modeled by Hellenistic architecture, art, and painting, as seen by the comedies of Plautus and Terence, which were adapted from Greek originals. Latin literature made extensive use of Greek poetic and dramatic styles. In Eastern Mediterranean intellectual and diplomatic situations, the Greek language remained dominant. Many Greek cities, which are now governed by the Roman Empire, kept their unique customs, festivals, and facilities like theaters and gymnasiums. Long after Rome fell, in the West, Greek cultural traditions would be carried on in certain ways by the Eastern Roman Empire, which would ultimately become Byzantium. Greece was no longer a patchwork of autonomous city-states or Hellenistic kingdoms by the end of the 1st century BCE. Rather, it was incorporated into the expanding Roman state as an administrative province. Greek identity endured in local customs, language, and religion. However, the polis had essentially disappeared as an independent political institution. As the Roman elites shaped the empire's intellectual trajectory, Greek philosophers, orators, and religious ideas gradually found new audiences. The long-term effects of the Roman invasion were significant. Greek towns were no longer able to engage in inter-Polish warfare, which promoted relative peace in spite of high taxes and sporadic uprisings. The Mediterranean became even more united as a result of the trade and mobility made possible by Roman roads and infrastructure. However, the loss of autonomy was bitter for many Greeks. While some adapted to Roman sponsorship, others created sentimental narratives extolling former liberties. Nevertheless, the combination of Greek and Roman features led to the creation of the Greco-Roman civilization, which served as the basis for most of Western culture and passed on Greek political, artistic, scientific, and philosophical accomplishments to later generations. From prehistoric times to the Hellenistic era and beyond, Greek mythology and religion were ingrained in everyday life. Greek mythology and religious rituals continued to be essential components of cultural identity, even throughout Roman control. These myths, beliefs, and customs have endured in many forms over the ages and have had a significant impact on Western literature, art, and philosophy. The Olympian pantheon, usually headed by Zeus, the sky parent and king of gods, was the center of Greek religion. Along with goddesses like Hera, Demeter, and Hestia, his siblings were the sea deity Poseidon and the underworld king Hades, Aphrodite love, Ares battle, Apollo sun music prophesy, Artemis moon the hunt, Hermes messengers trade and cunning, and Athena knowledge and war were among the other main goddesses. Mount Olympus was home to a family of gods, each of whom ruled over certain realms and exhibited human-like emotions and interpersonal connections. Orthopraxy, or proper practice, was more important to religion in ancient Greece than doctrinal conviction. Public celebrations, like as civic festivals, processions, and sacrifices, served to reinforce social cohesiveness. A patron deity, or goddess, was usually revered by each polis, such as Artemis in Ephesus, Apollo, in Delphi, Athena, in Athens, etc. Congregational worship did not take place in temples. They kept treasures and cult sculptures devoted to the god. In contrast to later monotheistic priesthood, priests rarely served as moral authorities in addition to overseeing rituals. Divination was widespread, and oracles, such as the well-known Oracle of Delphi, were crucial in directing both private and public choices. Greek myths describe the gods' ancestries, the universe's beginnings, heroic sagas, and moral precepts. Despite being focused on the Trojan War and Odysseus's wanderings, Homer's Iliad and Odyssey are examples of early literature that reference many heavenly interventions. Hesiod's works and days provided farmers with moral and useful guidance, while including legendary allusions, while his Theogony methodically described the creation of gods and cosmic forces. Myths were quite flexible. They were woven into regional traditions and reenacted in comedies and tragedies at religious festivals. Regional tales of Jason and the Argonauts, Hercules, Theseus, Perseus, or Heracles differed. Heroes, sometimes semi-divine, served as a bridge between the worlds of the gods and humans, exhibiting virtues or cautioning against hubris. The idea of hubris, excessive pride that results in punishment, was a recurring motif that highlighted the conflict between heavenly order and earthly desire. Local cults were widespread despite the fact that Pan-Hellenic worship of Olympian gods gave them a shared identity. More specialized issues like rainfall healing or agricultural fertility were handled by nymph shrines, cave ceremonies, or rural sanctuaries. Secret rites given by mystery cults, like the Eleusinian mysteries devoted to Demeter and Persephone, promised initiates a better afterlife. Outside of the dominant civic cults, the Orphic tradition, which was linked to Orpheus stories, hinted at individual redemption by emphasizing the immortality and cleansing of the soul. Wider Hellenic beliefs coexisted with regional myths and deities such as the Cretan Zeus or local heroes. The adaptability of Greek religion, which included elements from nearby cultures, the Minoans and the Mycenaeans, is highlighted by this diversity. These devotional practices were eventually exported by Greek colonists who founded new sanctuaries in Magna Graecia, or the Black Sea region. Traditional myths were questioned by philosophers starting in the 5th century BCE. The depiction of gods was condemned by Xenophanes as immoral. Although Plato utilized stories allegorically, his dialogues offered philosophical goals that went beyond anthropomorphic deities. The logical or materialist frameworks that the skeptics, Stoics, and Epicureans constructed downplay the importance of direct supernatural involvement. Rather than taking myths as absolute facts, many thinkers reinterpreted them as moral or symbolic messages. However, public religious ceremonies persisted, and philosophers seldom ever advocated for a categorical rejection of religion. Even skeptics took part in religious festivities to some degree, since they continued to be an important element of social life. Greek mythology and religion influenced monumental frieze sculptures for temples and vase paintings. Buildings like as the Parthenon, which depicted the birth of Athena, and the Panathenaic procession, were adorned with scenes of gods, heroes, and mythical wars. The deity of wine was associated with dramatic art through the appearance of Dionysian symbols on wine containers and in theater. As these stories represented common human situations, Hellenistic and Roman patrons continued the practice of portraying mythological topics, conflict, love, and triumphing against animals. By dramatizing tales like Oedipus Agamemnon or Medea that explored fate, free will, and piety, tragedy blossomed in literature. Gods and stories were frequently mocked in comedy for comedic effect. Greek moral and cultural values were shaped by the Homeric epics, which served as educational works that were virtually sacrosanct. Greek mythology was preserved far into the imperial and later Christian eras because to the Latin epics composed by authors like Ovid, even during the Roman era. Greek gods blended with regional deities during Alexander's conquests of Egypt and Asia, creating syncretic figures such as Serapis, who combined elements of Osiris, Apis, and Zeus. Particularly in the Hellenistic countries, rulers frequently asserted their divine or semi-divine status. Although they were dressed in pharaonic garb, kings of Ptolemaic Egypt also carried out Greek rites. Greek, Egyptian, Mesopotamian, and Persian components were therefore blended into local religion, making it even more varied. Numerous Greek deities were equated with Roman equivalents throughout the Roman era, such as Zeus and Jupiter, Hera, and Juno, and so on. Greek mysteries gained new followers. Oracles continued to draw travelers, and festivals persisted. Asclepius, the god of healing, was one of the many cults that proliferated across the Roman Empire. Greek mythological themes persisted in influencing philosophy and art, even as new religions, such as Christianity, gained popularity throughout time. Greek mythology continued to serve as a source of inspiration for poets, painters, and thinkers, even after Christianity's victory in the later Roman Empire. Byzantine and Islamic scholarship preserved knowledge of these tales into the Middle Ages. Classical literature was rediscovered during the Western European Renaissance, which gave mythical themes new life in sculpture and art. Greek myths were re-examined by Romantic and Enlightened intellectuals to examine universal human circumstances. Ancient Greek stories are still being resurrected in modern literature, film, and other media, demonstrating their enduring popularity. Regarding religion under Christian emperors such as Theodosius I, who outlawed public liberties, old pagan rituals progressively diminished. However, theology was profoundly influenced by Greek religious conceptions, particularly in regards to notions of the soul, morality, and cosmic order. shaped by a legendary tradition that valued reasoned inquiry without discounting cosmic awe. Early Christian and Jewish theologians grappled with Plato's ideals or Aristotle's reasoning. All things considered, Greek mythology and religion served as the foundation for a society that valued both logic and creative narrative. In addition to influencing ancient Greece's religious life, its gods, heroes, and festivals also influenced the development of Western culture and art later on, though sometimes eclipsed by contemporary monotheistic beliefs. The worldview revealed by the live representations of gods and epic tales is nonetheless essential to comprehending the roots of Western literature, art, and philosophy. One of the most important traditions of the ancient world is Greek philosophy. It began with intellectuals in the 6th century BCE who looked for natural explanations for the universe and developed into a systematic investigation of politics, ethics, metaphysics, and other topics. Greek philosophy had divided into several schools by the Hellenistic era, each of which offered a distinct route to the happy life. In Ionia, Western Asia Minor, the first philosophers often referred to as pre-Socratics arose. People like Thales of Miletus, who lived about May, suggested that the cosmos was created from a single substance, water, in his opinion. His successors looked for a unifying principle, the arca behind reality. Anaximander proposed the boundless apeiron, whereas Anaximenes concentrated on air. The concepts of flux, everything flowing, and fire's function as a dynamic element were brought by Heraclitus from Ephesus. Parmenides said in Alea that multiplicity and motion are illusions and that actual reality is immutable. Zeno, his follower, used paradoxes to subvert the senses. Democritus's atomism, which held that all phenomena are the product of indivisible atoms moving in a void. Empedocles' four-element theory and Pythagoras' emphasis on numbers and harmony were among the other threads. Together, these intellectuals changed Greek thinking from legendary justifications to logical explorations of nature. By the end of the 5th century BC, 469 to March had been questioned relentlessly about moral issues. He left no written legacy. Plato and Xenophon are among the students who have taught us about him. The first step to wisdom, according to Socrates, is admitting one's ignorance. He questioned smug presumptions that ultimately resulted in accusations of impiety and youth corruption. Socrates was condemned to death, and his trial and execution came to represent the conflict between civic rules and unfettered inquiry. Plato, who founded the school and produced dialogues examining metaphysics, ethics, and political philosophy, lived from around 1927 to March. According to his theory of forms, the visible world is only a shadow, whereas ultimate reality is made up of timeless, flawless models, such as justice or beauty. He promoted the idea of philosopher monarchs ruling a civilization in books like The Republic. Centuries of Western thinking have been influenced by Plato's ideas on the eternal soul, remembering truths, and seeking perfect forms. Aristotle, a disciple of Plato, adopted a more empirical stance. He lived from 384 to March. He founded the Lyceum and published a great deal about politics, physics, biology, logic, ethics, and aesthetics. Aristotle thought that knowledge came from seeing the natural world and that form and matter were connected. While politics examined various governmental structures, his Nicomachean ethics suggested virtue as a middle ground between extremes. The scientific method was established by Aristotle's writings, which had an impact on both modern science and medieval scholastics. As philosophy developed to confront life in the Hellenistic kingdoms, Athens and other centers continued to thrive after Aristotle. Among them were important schools. Around March Zeno of Citium created Stoicism, which holds that people should align their will with the order of nature, and that the universe is ruled by logical rules known as logos. The only real good is virtue. Riches, health, and all material possessions are irrelevant. Stoics who stressed self-control and accepting one's fate were Chrysippus Seneca and Marcus Aurelius, the latter two of whom lived under the Roman Empire. According to Epicureanism, the ultimate good is pleasure, which is defined as the absence of pain. Epicurus lived from 341 to February. He promoted brotherhood simplicity and the absence of unreasonable worries, particularly those related to death or the gods. By asserting that the soul is material and vanishes at death, Epicurus expanded on Democritus's atomism and eliminated the fear of a hereafter. Doubt. Pyrrho and the subsequent academic skeptics in Plato's school argued that some knowledge is impossible to get and advocated for mental peace by suspending judgment or epoche. This position forced other schools to hone their arguments for or against absolute truths, challenging dogmatic assertions. Cynicism, which may be traced back to Antisthenes and Diogenes of Sinope, advocated a return to a moral life in harmony with nature and condemned social norms, riches, prestige, and comfort as being unnatural. They were well known for their Spartan, even brazen lifestyle, mocking material belongings, and engaging in provocative behaviors to expose hypocrisy. People in the vast Hellenistic kingdoms who felt cut off from the private politics of the ancient polis found resonance in these schools. Under royal autocracies, Hellenistic philosophers focused on attaining virtue or personal peace, whereas Plato and Aristotle had built the ideal city-state. Greek intellectual traditions were adopted by Roman elites as Rome grew into the Greek world. In particular, emperors and senators dealing with authority found sobriety appealing. Greek ideas were incorporated into Latin texts by individuals such as Cicero and Seneca. Neoplatonism was established by Plotinus in the 3rd century CE, combining Aristotelian, Pythagorean, and Platonic concepts in a mystical framework that had a significant impact on early Christian and later medieval philosophy. From medieval scholasticism, which was founded on Aristotle's logic and metaphysics, to Renaissance humanism, which revived Platonic ideals, Greek philosophy influenced the foundation of Western intellectual history. While Stoic and Epicurean ideals continue to influence modern self-help and health initiatives, the Socratic method serves as the foundation for contemporary instructional practices. The logical pursuit of truth about nature and the human situation remained fundamentally anchored in Greek philosophical legacy, even in the face of changes in religious perspectives. Greek philosophy essentially promoted the idea that people may study reality by using logical argument, observation, and reasoned discussion. Greek philosophers established frameworks that are being used in discussions of science ethics and epistemology today, whether they were examining the universe or the essence of good. Their influence endures in academic institutions, research centers, and ethical frameworks around the globe, demonstrating the timeless value of research that originated in ancient Greece. Western culture has been greatly impacted by the literary, architectural, and artistic accomplishments of ancient Greece. Greek ingenuity created ideals of beauty, realism, and narrative structure that still influence artistic expression today, from the colossal temples of the ancient era to the sophisticated plays of Athens. The three primary orders of Greek architecture, Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian, each had unique proportions and ornamental features. Doric, the strongest and most basic, with plain capitals and columns without bases. With minor details like curved stylobates and column emphasis to remedy optical illusions, the Parthenon 400 to 7 April, on the Athenian Acropolis, dedicated to Athena, is a prime example of the Doric order. Ionic, distinguished by volute scroll-shaped capitals and columns with bases. Ionic architecture frequently featured a continuous frieze, rather than Doric's divided triglyphs and metopes. The most elaborate, with columns topped with acanthus leaves, is the Temple of Athena Nike on the Acropolis at Corinth. It was less widespread throughout the ancient era, but it gained popularity during the Hellenistic era and was frequently used by the Romans. Greek urban design was further distinguished by theaters carved into hillsides, stoas for public meetings, colossal gateways, propylons, and temples that were usually rectangular with a peristyle of columns. The Hippodamian grid pattern was established by cities like Asmalitis and Priene. The Shrine of Zeus at Pergamon and the vast municipal projects in Alexandria are examples of the monumental and ornamental architecture that developed throughout the Hellenistic era. The idealized yet realistic sculptures of the classical era replaced the stiff, archaic kouros and core of the 6th century BCE. Harmonious anatomy and balanced positions were sought after by early masters such as Phidias the Parthenon's sculptural program, Polykleitos Doryphorus, who exemplified his canon of proportions, and Myron, who was renowned for the Discobolus. The emphasis on proportion and moral order during that time was reflected in the figure's serene dignity. Sculptors, such as Praxiteles Aphrodite of Knidos and Lysippos Alexander's court sculptor, adopted more dynamic stances and thin proportions in the 4th century BCE, adding subtle movement and emotion. The emotional spectrum was then broadened by Hellenistic sculpture. Pain was vividly depicted by Laocoon and his sons. With vibrant draperies, Samothrace's winged triumph soared, and in defeat, the dying Gaul portrayed nobility. Intimate daily situations, the aged and regular people were also portrayed by artists. This turn toward more sorrow and realism reflected the Hellenistic world's multicultural complexity. Between the 7th and 6th centuries, BCE Greek vase painting progressed from geometric patterns to black figurative subjects, followed by red figure methods in the late 6th to 4th centuries BCE. The workshops of Athens flourished, depicting myths, sports, and family life with ever-increasing realism. Famous vase painters include the Berlin painter Red Figure and Exekias Black Figure. Many of these containers, which were used for serving, storing, or making ceremonial gifts, have survived in Etruscan graves, demonstrating Greek craftsmanship that went beyond sculpture. Sadly, large-scale panel paintings that were lauded in antiquity have seldom survived. A complex use of color perspective and anatomy is suggested by allusions to artists such as Polygnotus Zeuxis and Apelles. Roman replicas, mosaics, or ancient authors' descriptions give us some idea of their competence. Based on a Hellenistic artwork, the Alexander mosaic at Pompeii depicts complex war scenes with three-dimensional characters and shading. Epic was the first work of Greek literature. With its stories of gods, heroes, and moral quandaries, Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, written in the 8th century BCE, established the standard for epic narrative and shaped Greek identity. Hesiod included aspects of theogony genealogy, didactics works, and days. Lyric poetry, which explored both personal and political issues, flourished during the Archaic and Classical periods. Lesbos poet Sappho produced personal poetry about love and desire, whereas Alcaeus Anacreon and Pindar praised sports wine or battle. With a focus on melodic and rhythmic inventiveness, poets presented these pieces to musical accompaniment. Thousands of people attended the state-sponsored Dionysia festivities, which marked the height of Athens' theatrical production in the 5th century BCE. Tragedies exploring human fate, divine justice, and moral dilemmas in mythological settings were written by Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides. With his strong humor and political satire, Aristophanes transformed comedy by making fun of public persons and concepts. These plays connected performance with municipal religious festivals by being presented in outdoor theaters, such as Athens Theater of Dionysus. The genres of prose first appeared in the 5th century BCE. Herodotus earned the moniker Father of History by blending narrative and research to describe the Persian Wars and the traditions of distant peoples. When writing on the Peloponnesian War, the more analytical historian Thucydides focused on cause and effect power relationships and eyewitness reports. Plato employed dialogues to examine philosophical issues, whereas Xenophon documented subsequent events and Socratic discussions. From biology to rhetoric, Aristotle's writings organized information in a way that combined analysis and observation. Poetry expanded in post-classical periods. Callimachus Apollonius of Rhodes, Argonautica, and other Hellenistic authors in Alexandria created sophisticated scholarly works that combined mythological knowledge with epic themes. Under Theocritus, pastoral poetry flourished, showcasing pastoral landscapes and passionate shepherds. Roman dramatists, Plautus and Terence, subsequently adapted the new comedy, which was developed by playwrights such as Menander and centered on domestic storylines with stock characters. Greek writers continued to compose in a variety of genres throughout Roman domination. With the rise of schools in Athens and elsewhere, philosophical literature thrived. Throughout the Eastern Empire, Greek was still widely used and had an impact on Christian writings, particularly in Koine Greek. Greece's literary and intellectual traditions endured, despite the decline of political sovereignty, influencing the Byzantine and Roman cultures. Greek literature, art, and architecture continue to be essential components of Western story structures and aesthetics. Greek architectural styles were appropriated by the Romans, who later disseminated them over Europe, North Africa, and the Near East. Classical sculpture was rediscovered by Renaissance artists who imitated its poise and anatomy. Greek dramatic traditions were resurrected by playwrights. Dante, Milton, and other contemporary writers all incorporated elements of epic and lyric poetry. For inspiration and methodological direction, philosophers and historians turned to Aristotle or Thucydides. Thus, Greek creative invention has influenced how other civilizations define beauty storytelling and intellectual endeavor, from the Parthenon's columns to Homer's lines, from Polykleidos's idealized statues to the intensely emotional Hellenistic sculptures. The timeless quality of Greek literature and art attests to the topic's worldwide appeal. Heroism, love, fate, civic morality, and the cross-disciplinary, technical mastery that the ancient Greeks sought. Their impact may still be seen today in Western cultural conceptual frameworks, museums, libraries, and theaters.